Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. I have with me an honored guest, the man in the pork pie hat himself, Mr. Tom Guralnick. Tom, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh,
Glad to be.
absolutely. You've been a mainstay here in the New Mexico music community for decades, and we're going to talk about that here. But let's talk about some things that people may or may not know about you. So now you're from Brookline, right? Which is the Massachusetts, which is a small town outside of Boston. Were you born and raised there?
I was, yep.
Okay.
Uh, Grew up in the house that my mother, my mother's parents had built when she was 12 years old. And at that time, it was in the middle of the country. I mean, it wasn't in like Iowa. It was very countrified, is what I'm
Right,
trying
right, right,
to.
right.
It didn't shift geographically. Uh, but at any rate, it was like one of the first houses on our street. And she grew up there, and then she, and then they moved back in when I was born. I was the third kid in the family, and my grandparents lived there, and through that whole time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now tell me how you got started in music, because I know your family is very music orientated and stuff. But so how did you get started in music? Was it a band program or was it something
No,
else?
no, I think the main thing that got me into music was really my brother's influence. I mean, we all like, yeah, everybody likes music and stuff, but my brother was, a few years older than me, and he was a big, got into the blues, like, like, quote unquote, rediscovering
Mhm.
blues artists in the 60s. And so he was very much a part of that scene when it first started, bringing people like Sunhouse and Booker White and all these people like Skip James, sort of out of obscurity and playing music again and going to the Newport Folk Festival and so forth. And he wrote for he's a writer, and he wrote
Right.
for magazines. He was a fiction writer at that time, and but he also wrote for all the music magazines in Boston and the blues magazines and so
Right.
forth, the Phoenix,
Right.
Crawdaddy, Rolling Stone in the early days and so forth. So he was a big influence and got me listening to, in a sense, for very obscure music for in terms of what my peers were listening to. I was listening to these old musicians from Mississippi Delta, in Chicago and stuff, and going to see them with Peter. Peter, my brother's name is Peter, and he would take me to, these to folk clubs in Cambridge, but also clubs in Boston and stuff where we'd see blues and rhythm and blues and so forth. So that
Okay.
was a big influence on me, and in a sense, it set me off as being kind of different from the everybody, from my pals who were listening to rock and roll, which I was doing also deeply into.
Right.
I was into, pretty seriously into black music right from time I was 10 years old.
Okay. Now so how did you get started on saxophone? Was it like the band program at school
Yeah.
or was it something different?
I got into music late. I mean, and I always took circuitous routes in terms of my life. So, I loved blues. I liked Elmore James and J.B. Hutto and, all these, Robert Johnson and stuff. But I
Mhm.
thought, okay, well, I'm going to learn guitar. I'm going to learn classical guitar, which I really wasn't interested in at all. But I thought, okay, I'm going to do that. And so I did that so that was the first thing I did, was playing, and I thought, okay, well, I'll learn this, traditional. I think I took piano lessons also, but that was in high school. I did that. And then I bought an electric guitar and messed around with it, and I played harmonica and so forth until like my second year in college. I went to Harvard for 2 years, and I was playing harmonica, and I had a friend who was a really good folk musician and also was playing bossa novas and stuff. And I guess that was when I first listened to Stan Getz and Joao
Mhm.
Gilberto, the Getz Gilberto record. And that got me, really interested in saxophone. And then, so I started playing saxophone in, like my third year in college, and then dropped out of Harvard. It was a pretty tumultuous time. It was 1969. The school was closed down for anti-war strikes and so forth. And so I dropped out. And it was also during the draft, and I kept being very close to being drafted. I mean, it was not a good time to drop out of school. I left Cambridge was pretty crazy, and I decided to go back to school, but I went to school in Vermont called Bennington College,
Right.
which was a women's school until I got there. I think I was in the second class of having men up there, or the third class and stuff. So
okay. Now, where in Vermont is Bennington?
Where in Vermont? Is southern Vermont.
Okay, southern Vermont. Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of in the tri-state area, New York
Okay.
State. So Massachusetts, New York State, up in that corner there.
Okay. So now is that kind of where you discovered, and I want to use the word term loosely, free jazz, avant-garde jazz? Is that kind of where you kind of discovered it? What was your
So
draw?
there was a teacher up there named Bill Dixon, who was a trumpet player, actually. Have you ever heard his work at all?
No, I'm not familiar with it. I'll have to go and look this up.
Yeah, he's very completely, well, unique is unique. It's not completely unique. You're either unique or you're not unique. Anyway, he was part of the quote unquote free jazz scene with Cecil Taylor and so forth. There was an organization called the October Revolution in Jazz in 1967, where they started to boycott clubs and stuff. It was the beginning of the Jazz Composers Orchestra and so forth, with people like Roswell Rudd, Carla Bley, Mike Mandler, Cecil Taylor, Archie Shepp, Sun Ra, and Bill was an organizer of that. And he was really, he plays the trumpet really differently from the way anybody plays the trumpet.
Okay.
I really recommend everybody check him out. He died a few years ago at age 80. I guess it's maybe 10 years ago now, actually, in his 80s.
Okay.
And he just spent his whole life dedicated to playing his own sound, his own way, and developing a language and a vocabulary that was his and his alone. And so that's my friend, Tony Ackerman, the guitarist who was at Harvard with me and I knew since high school. He went up there to study with Bill, and I went up with him, and that's when I decided, okay, I'm gonna go up there, because it seemed like a really interesting scene and so forth. So Bill's thing was play your instrument the way nobody has played it before. You're not playing the saxophone, you're playing a saxophone, and the stress is on developing your own sound, which everybody does doesn't matter if you play bebop, or you play quote unquote free jazz, you're playing a vocabulary and doing it your way.
Right.
But there are degrees of that. So what I took it to the extreme degree, playing, in a way that nobody had done. But in a sense, that was what everybody did. That was what that scene was about. If you weren't trying to be a bebopper. And at that time, there was no music. There was no jazz, quote unquote jazz, in schools.
Right.
And Bill formed the black music department. Then nobody wanted to call it. That generation of musicians in the 60s, it was really, they were very against calling it jazz. And they were very into breaking the norm and the way people think of jazz as entertainment. And it's not art music, and people talk and drink while they listen to it. And this whole scene that Bill was really elemental in was the loft scene that grew out of that was very much in rejection of those values, and even calling the music jazz, which incidentally, Duke Ellington never wanted the music called jazz either. He didn't call his music jazz. It was just, you know, Duke Ellington music. And
Right.
Duke Ellington had his own vocabulary and sound as much as his orchestra. There's no other orchestra that sounded like his orchestra.
Right.
And it played off of everybody playing the way that they play.
Right. And so when you were getting involved with this scene, right? So you were still in college. What were you studying at school? Were you studying jazz education or educational music
There was
education?
there was no such thing as jazz education.
I
I mean,
know, I know. I said the wrong term. I mean,
yeah,
so
but
were you studying music at the
I
time? Is
was I
that
was studying with Bill in
okay?
playing in his ensembles, and then also developing our own ensembles with people who played with Bill. So and I was writing. I was a writer, and I was writing actually interested in writing plays,
Okay.
and and I was fairly serious about that when I was at Harvard, and continued to do it. But then I really moved more in the music direction. So
Okay.
so I majored in music at Bennington, and then studied with some of the. But there became two music departments: the black music
Right.
department
Yeah,
and the
black
Western
music department
European.
and the regular music department.
Yeah,
And it was a very tumultuous time in the late 60s and the early 70s. And
yeah.
everybody was rejecting lots of things. And I can understand where this came from. So you moved.
Well, they felt, like Bill and everybody. I mean, all black musicians and other jazz musicians, you weren't accepted into if it's like you had to do things like play classical guitar before you could play blues. I mean, in a way, that's what I did. And you had to supposedly be able to, play Western European music before you could improvise.
Right.
So that was the way it was then. And
So,
it was all the avant-garde musicians who really created the beginnings of jazz education. It was Bill Dixon, Cecil Taylor. They formed departments in Ann Arbor and in Bennington, Vermont. And Bill he came up there as an accompanist with Judith Dunn, who was an avant-garde dancer and part of the Judson arts scene in New York City. And
okay.
then he went on to form this department. So in Madison, Wisconsin, another place where things were happening.
So did you move around within the circles of all the different styles, or were you really most of the stuff that you were doing was that free jazz avant-garde style? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah,
Were
yeah.
you
No,
moving around through different circles?
I was never a good bebop player. I never got those chops together.
Okay.
And I wasn't. I really went very early into developing my own world of sound.
Okay. So let's talk about what brought you to Albuquerque and when did you get here? Because you've been here a long time. I know you have been here a long
Yeah.
time. So what brought you to Albuquerque? When did you get to Albuquerque?
So I moved here in '76. After Bennington, my first wife and I met at Bennington, and she was an artist, and we spent a couple of years in Boston after being in Vermont, and I worked actually making silver flutes.
Oh,
Like,
really?
yeah, Powell flutes, the best flutes at that time in the world. But my wife, was a good very good visual artist, and she came here to get an MFA, came to Albuquerque to get an MFA. So I came with her. I was playing in Boston with a band called the Year of the Year that was a sort of kind of a seminal experimental big band, but in that run by guitarist and friend who's still a friend, Baird Hersey. We met up in Bennington, and that band played all around Boston, and a lot of people played in it. Stanton Davis, who's a trumpet player. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but a lot of people went through that band. Great drummers, you know. So because Boston, was a real scene with Berkeley being there. We played
Right.
at a club called Pooh's Pub, this tiny little club in Kenmore Square, and the next night, Pat Metheny and Jocko and would play there also, because they were at Berkeley, and
Well,
everybody went through Berkeley. So it was quite a scene.
most people know you as the director of the Outpost, just like the sign says behind you. Most people know you as the director of the Outpost Productions, which we will talk about here in just a little bit. But what they may not know about you is that you were actually a moderately successful avant-garde artist for many years. I mean, so we've talked about how you got your beginnings, but one of the things that I do want to talk about is I remember seeing you where you had this big, gigantic monster setup, and people can see it. I'm going to put a link down below to your YouTube channel
Right.
because it shows your whole setup. Where in the world did you get those ideas to come up with such unique instruments, such unique, I don't even know what to call them.
Well, it was an evolutionary process. When I came out here, I was just into playing the saxophone in a different way,
Mm-hmm.
and I I actually wrote a thesis, which isn't really available. Anybody who wants to read it, I can send a PDF. But about my development of this, I called it the not so, in parentheses, mobile saxophone and mute unit. Saxophone
It
and mute.
wasn't mobile. Oh my God, it was humongous. I
It
think
takes
I
two
read
hours.
once that it was like a 200-pound setup.
Yeah, probably was about that because I used to tour in Europe and I had two big cases, and it was basically getting the idea. So I knew that there were certain things technically that I wasn't going to. I went a different direction in developing my own sound. I liked building things. I
Mhm.
did maintenance at the summer camp that my grandfather ran and that my brother took over. And I always liked building things. I wanted to be a carpenter and everything. And I did a lot of plumbing. And I used those skills, and kind of as I would go through a store, I would say, wow, I wonder how that could use. So I built this rack of instruments, which is not unlike a drum set, you know.
Right.
And because if you think about it, the drums, jazz drummers, they invented a way to access all those sounds by this drum set. It did, because in an orchestra, people play the bass drum, they play the cymbal, but what the jazz drum tradition did is put it all together in a setup. So that's basically what I did, but I wasn't trying to create a sound that anybody else had created. I was trying to create my own sound. So I thought about, okay, sax trumpet puts mutes in there to change the sound of their instrument. So I started thinking, how could we do that with the saxophone? And then how could we, put tubes on the end of the saxophone to increase its range and also change its whole tonal structure?
Oh yeah,
And then
change the whole
how can I,
sound.
yeah. So that started as an idea of, okay, we'll play like a piece with the saxophone with a harmon mute, a trombone harmon mute in it, and a tube on the end of it. I'll play one little piece that be like a sound, like a sound, um, like a little poem, a sound
Right.
poem, a tone poem. But then I thought, well, okay, how can I do this so I can do those things and move between them quickly and change from one sound to the next, not just do one piece. And then I had bicycle horns
Right.
on
You
my
had everything.
feet, So the gradually, there was building this setup that would, where I could access all this world of sound that I had, and that I had really kind of I think found more than invented, you
Yeah,
know.
I wouldn't say, I mean, but you, in a way, you did invent it because it's not like you invented what you use. You were inventing how you use it. Because
Right.
I got to admit, I do remember one performance, I think it was in Santa Fe that I got to see that was just, I was like, I sat there going, where did he get these ideas? And I remember when we were going to talk about, doing this interview, I was like, I got to ask you how you just kind of came out of nowhere, didn't it? You just kind of, oh, maybe if I did this or maybe if I did that. It's
Well, that, but it also was a surprisingly logical expression, which is, I mean, a development, a
right,
surprisingly logical evolution. Let's put it that
right.
way.
Well,
You
and it
know,
is an
and
expression. If you think about it, it's your way of expressing your music, however you choose to do it. You are expressing your thoughts, your ideas, however you choose to do it. And you chose to do it in a very unique way, which we use that word. It is very unique.
yeah, it is. Yeah, and that was, kind of what everybody was trying to do at that time, who was part of that scene, was come up with some new way, some unique way of doing things um, that other people hadn't done, you
Right.
know. And
Okay.
then with the setup, people can see it on the YouTube, and I'm quite proud of those things on YouTube. They're from 1986, I think, and there's one duet performance with my good friend David Moss that I think is really wonderful. I play solo and then he plays solo and then we play together,
Right.
and we remain good friends. He lives in Berlin, has developed a really great career in sort of avant-garde theater and sound, and
Okay.
he does
It's
local.
yeah, it's so unique. It really is. And I still think you should continue, but that's for a whole other interview. So now one of the things I read is that you have a master's degree from is it Wesleyan? Is that how you say it? Wesleyan University?
Wesleyan.
Okay, Wesleyan University. So
Yeah.
that's in Connecticut.
Yeah.
So why did you go? So what
So
brought you to Wesleyan to get your master's degree?
So when I was out here, and then my first wife and I split up, and we actually both ended up moving back east. But I moved back east to really concentrate on my music. But an important part is that in those years in New Mexico, those first years in New Mexico, I got into running the New Mexico Jazz Workshop, which had just formed. It was a collective of musicians who were my good friends, Pete Amal and Steve Feld and Dave Moyer and Sherman Rubin, who was a distant cousin, and so forth. They had formed the New Mexico Jazz Workshop that did concerts in schools and so forth. And there was a collective of musicians.
Mm-hmm.
And then they were all going in different directions. Steve's a world famous ethnomusicologist who does work all over the world, and he was in New Guinea at the time when I moved out here. But they said, well, why don't we have $1,000 in the bank? Why don't you take it over? They basically did the major program. They did things in the schools, and they did at the Madrid ballpark every Sunday, all summer. It was a jam session, and people were
Mm-hmm.
playing. People from
I
Albuquerque.
attended.
Yeah. So they said, well, we're kind of, why don't you take it over? And that I took it over, and it became, rather than a collective of musicians, it became I made it into a presenting organization. So we presented Cecil Taylor. Right away, I presented a few of my friends, in the first year. And then I wrote a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts right when it was first formed. NEA was formed in 72. In 76, we wrote the grant, thing. And that the New Mexico Arts Division started at that time. So I was at the beginning of jazz moving into the nonprofit world. So that's
Mm-hmm.
how I got into that. And that's what got me into being a presenter, which is sort of set the stage for later on when I came back and started Outpost. But I went back to Boston to concentrate on my own music. I studied in Boston. I studied with a bebop piano player, Charlie Banakas, who was good friends with Jerry Buganzi, and it was a whole scene that
Yeah.
people did. And I never really got good at it because I wasn't that interested, I guess. But I did my own music as well. And then I decided, well, this is kind of cool. Why don't I get a master's degree while I'm at it? And I got into Wesleyan, which had a tremendous quote unquote world music program. And I say quote unquote because all music is world music.
Mm-hmm.
Symphony is as much world music as Western European music is just if you can make that huge category, just
Yeah.
as much world music as African music. But at any rate, the world music was thought of as the other, African music, Indian music. And Wesleyan was one of the early programs with that really strong program of South Indian music, North Indian music, music of Bali, Indonesian music. They had a gamelan. They also had a jazz program. Eddie Blackwell, Ornette's
Okay.
drummer, lived
Hmm.
in Middletown. He taught there. Bill Barron, who was Kenny Barron's brother,
Hmm.
saxophone player, who was he taught there. And so I went there, and I thought, well, they let me in, and gave I got a. It was great. It was a free ride, I mean, and I could study all this stuff. So I
And your
studied South
degree,
Indian
what was your master's degree in?
in, I guess, I get just music.
Music. Let's talk about how the Outpost came about, because you said you started off with the jazz workshop and then you left town. And then when you came back, what was your what was the idea of the Outpost performance space? How did that come about?
So, I had in that time I had toured around the country and in Europe as well, and played in a lot of spaces, that you could have 20 people, and that was like a good audience for me. I mean, that's what that scene was about, and playing to small audiences in an intimate space where people are listening to music, which is kind of an extension of the loft scene. But at any rate, I had done that, and I thought, when I came back here, I thought I was just coming back to write my thesis, to tell you the truth, and that I would leave. I had bought a house when I lived here, and I came back, and I literally drove over the state line and said, "This feels more like home than anywhere else." So I ended up staying, and I finished my master's degree, and my thesis, and I decided to. I actually started to do house concerts at my house. So I continued to do my music, but I also had in mind that I would, if I started an organization again, it would be based around a small space. And it
Okay.
would be a listening space, and there would be no smoking and no alcohol, which at the time was different. It set it off
Hmm.
because there was smoking everywhere. So it was kind of, my idea was what it is still today, which is a sort of informally respectful kind of space, which is somewhere between a coffee house and a concert hall and a club.
Right.
Has feel of all of those.
Right.
So that was I lived. I sold my house and bought a building on Morningside.
Hmm.
I lived upstairs, and the performance space was downstairs. And the
Yeah.
first night of it wasn't actually the first night, but it was like kind of an opening party. And it went for hours and hours. And there was everything from people playing bull roars to solo Bach cello suites to the Matachinas musicians to, Bayo Seco to rock bands to jazz people. And I said, well, and to, African musicians. And I said, this is what Outpost should be.
Right.
It was kind of an epiphany that that's what it should be. It shouldn't just be an avant-garde space. So I
Right.
started, and I started doing that. Actually, before I had the space, I did concerts in venues around town, and my interest in world music, I brought Thomas Mapfumo here from Zimbabwe for the first
Mhm.
time, and South Indian music, T.N. Krishnan and T. Vishwanathan and various people, and Efat Mujiru from Zimbabwe also, and Fode Musa Suso from the Gambia. And so I did these shows at the Chemo and so
Okay.
forth. So it really had a world music bent. And then I did shows in the Living Batch bookstore of more avant-garde improvised music, and some of them were me playing, but mostly bringing other people in. And then I got the space, and
Okay.
the space was would be good for everything.
Yeah.
you know
Oh, and it's funny because as a nonprofit, you present all types of music. You don't pigeonhole on anything. I mean, it is truly a performance space. Now, when you moved into when did you move from the Morningside location into your current location
So
off
we
of
were
Yale?
at Morningside from 1989 till 2000. And in
Okay.
2000, I moved into the space on Yale, which was, twice as big
Hmm.
and was really great. And people said, "Oh, for the beginning, oh, I miss the old space." I actually never missed it.
Well,
I
you moved into the building, what used to be the original Music Mart.
That's true,
Yeah.
but it had been many things before that,
Well, that's
actually,
true. That's true. But I remember when it was the old Music Mart, and then I
and
went. I
I
remember
do
when
it
you
as
guys
well.
took it over.
I used to go. No, it had a stint as an Aikido studio
Oh,
between the Music Mart and me, but it was a secretarial school before it was Music Mart.
oh, that's funny. Oh,
Yeah,
that's good. So, being a nonprofit, right? You must take a lot of your time writing grants, getting fundraising, trying to make sure that you have enough money to pay your musicians, which I know you pay them fairly. I mean, that must take a lot of your time to make sure that your fundraising and your building and everything is taken care of.
definitely. The income stream for the Outpost, 30% of it is ticket sales. The rest is members. We have like
Mhm.
750 members, which is pretty phenomenal for an organization our size. We have a budget of about $1 million a year now. But back when I started, it was $10,000 was the annual budget, and then in back at the old space, I got into the Lila Wallace Reader's Digest National Jazz Network, which was a big jump for Outpost, and
Mhm.
that was a major grant at that time. But major grants in the arts world, they're not like in the science world.
No, it's not. They're not billions of dollars, but
Yeah,
you
right.
still have to, and you're very, very good at it because you get, I mean, the grants, the NEA, all these other places that give you money because of the grants that you write, all the work that you do, you've made your Outpost performance space basically self-supporting. And for that, I compliment you because, again,
Thank
I'm a
you.
member and I come to my fair share of concerts, but I could not imagine the work that you go through to keep that place going.
There's a lot of long hours and years doing this, and and I always people say, "Oh, you must be a good grant writer," but really what it is if you can, I'm a decent writer, if you have a good program and you can describe it well, people will want to fund it.
Okay.
Uh, that's been my, that's how I've done what I do.
Okay.
So, yes, there are grants. There are people who sponsor concerts. They really want to give money to keep the place going, and yes, I try and pay people as well as possible. Like if local musicians have a concert here, I want it to be one of the best paying gigs that they have ever.
Yeah.
And for touring musicians, well, it can't be what they're going to make when they play in a concert hall the next night at a college, but it's a good, we pay well and we
Right.
take care of people.
I like your venue. I will be honest with you. I like your venue because it's not a club format.
Right.
You get in there and you're coming to see a concert. There's water if you want to buy it. There's always water you can buy, but no food, no outside this. No one's worried about all the different things. The idea here is you are going there to listen to music. Now, we know we also run educational programs through the Outpost, and,
Right.
and all of that stuff is going to be available. And I'll put the link to the website down
Great.
below in the
Great.
links and make sure people know about that.
It's great, Michael.
So
So
are you
the no food thing, yes, I didn't want to get into serving food and stuff, but it's worse. I mean, it's also we're semi post pandemic, and I'm trying to keep people from hanging around in a tiny space all the time. So we don't serve coffee and cookies, and my cookies were famous for years.
right? I know, but I like the fact that we come in and people are offered masks. They can wear masks. If you don't want to wear a mask, totally up to you. But I love the space. I really do. I for the first time last night, I looked up and realized that the ceiling is all open, and I hadn't noticed that before. I was like, oh, okay, that's a new one on me. So let's talk about some of your other things you do because Outpost isn't just the one thing you are involved with. You're involved with other arts programs, aren't you?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I'm at a point in my life where I like to help if I can be helpful to other arts organizations or artists, and people who are starting other organizations do that. I'm really happy to do that. And we're also contemplating and working on for the last 2 years during the pandemic, been working on a move to a new space. Actually, you might not even
Oh,
know that,
oh
Michael.
no, I had no idea.
And we're working towards the Sawmill Center for the Arts, and
Oh,
yeah, and it would be with 516 Arts, which is
right,
a forward-thinking, wonderful visual arts organization run by Suzanne Sparge,
right.
and Outpost, and then community spaces as well. And it would be housing. And it's still, we're not in a real public stage with the campaign, but we've raised a lot of money
Okay,
in the hopes of it happening. We've been funded by the Capital Outlay Program and the governor and legislators. So
okay,
anyway, I'm working on that. And I work
okay.
with the John Aaron Lewis Legacy Project with the John Lewis family. John
Hmm.
Lewis from the Modern Jazz Quartet.
Hmm.
He grew up here in
Yeah.
Albuquerque, and his cousins, Christina Houston and Bill Houston, still live here. I mean, there's still family here, and it's an amazing family, actually. Eric Bibb, the blues musician, is John Lewis's nephew. Uh,
Oh.
I mean, it's really quite a legacy. So I work with them, and everything got weird during pandemic and slowed down, but
Well, yeah, yeah,
we
that's a
do.
whole other story.
Oh,
That
it's
gets
yeah,
crazy. So let's talk about your discography because I went looking for some stuff and I couldn't find a whole lot to stream, but you
yeah.
had a couple of CDs out and some records. There's one, Albuquerque. I saw that one. There were a few others you had. Did you ever record with the TG3, which is the Tom Guralnick trio? Oh, look at that. See?
I have many copies available if people want to. I'm kind of a Luddite, and I'm also so busy with Outpost that I'm hoping, I just did do this YouTube channel and have put some things up there. And it's funny, the trio, we have one video.
Yeah, I
This
saw
was
that.
before, and it was taken by Jefferson Voorhees, who's a drummer, and Steve Feld plays trombone, and Jefferson's brother Steven came to town to watch a concert. So it's really funny. I tell this story because and I'm so happy we have this video. It's of us up at the College of Santa Fe, and what was called the
Yeah, it's not
college.
called the College of Santa Fe anymore, but yeah.
So, but Stephen was mostly interested in Jefferson, as a good brother should be. So there were like times when, I'd be playing a saxophone solo and it would just be looking at Jefferson playing drums. So there are some, and I'm just happy to have that. And that's on my YouTube channel. And we did some editing so to make it make a little more sense,
Okay.
and I mean, it's cool. I wish I had more. I think there was some from a festival up in Canada that I'm trying to get. But anyway, this stuff is all 30 years old.
Yeah, and I'll put a link down below again for the
Yeah,
YouTube
great.
channel because I was looking at that and I was laughing. I'm like, oh, I could tell when this was recorded
Yeah, it was
because
on,
nowadays people can just pull out their phones and get 1080p, and you can tell this is an old video camcorder that's
that's
being
right,
recorded on. You
right.
can tell that. So,
VHS.
so do you have any intentions of going back to performing, or
Uh,
is Outpost takes so much of your time?
the latter. I mean, I was really nice during the height of the pandemic. I was playing my saxophone more. I mean, I hadn't played it in 20 years, but it's every once in a while I take it out and I really enjoy it. And I actually sound good. I mean,
So can we
didn't,
expect an outpost for like an outpost performance from you one day soon?
yeah, not one day soon, but it better be soon because I'm not getting any younger. So anyway, I'm not planning on performing, but but I would like to play more. But it's just I'm so I spend so much time
Oh,
doing.
I know. Your whole life revolves around this program. So I got time for one more question, and I've always asked this question of all my musicians because musicians have the greatest stories, and I'm sure you've got some good ones. So, strangest gig funniest story of something that happened to you that you were involved with? Can you share something with us?
You know, I just saw that it sort of got you. I printed out your questions, and I wish I had looked at it more ahead of time. And now I really feel I'm not good under pressure, believe it or not. And I'm gonna, when we get off of this call, I'm sure I'll think about a, a million things, that have happened. And I mean, I could have talk about a lot of my experiences, as a presenter. There are many
Oh, I
stories.
bet there are.
Yeah, and most
Well,
of them are really wonderful. I tell you, presenting this music has been a blessing. People are fantastic, and really appreciate it. So, but I do have a few stories, that probably shouldn't be told.
okay.
And but I can't even think of them right now. And
No,
as for
it's fine.
gigs, as for
It's fine.
gigs, I will
You
tell you
could,
something that
what?
I live with my I have a recurrent nightmare, anxiety dream.
Oh
And
no.
it's that, like, I'm about to play a solo concert. And this has been going on now. I haven't played a solo concert in probably 35 years now, I would say. The trio I did because it was easier to do, and it was, I could do it other places and so forth. So after I stopped actually doing solo concerts, and uh but this dream has been around for 30 years, where there's a concert about to happen and I haven't even started setting up yet. And it's a 2-hour setup. And I'm doing other things to facilitate, like working out things, doing more producerial type things. And then I suddenly realized, like, I'm supposed to play, and I haven't practiced, and I haven't. So I would say that is not my strangest gig, but my scariest gig. And it happens repeatedly in the middle of the night to this day. So I think maybe.
That's funny. Well, hopefully one day we'll all get to hear you play soon. Until then,
Thank you,
I
Mike.
want to thank, we're running out of time. I want to thank Tom for joining me. Tom, personally, I want to thank you for all the good work that you do here in Albuquerque, all the musical contributions you do, the musicians you bring to the stage, all the hard work you do. Really, trust me, from my heart, I say thank you, and I'm sure I am not alone with that because I know many people share our same sentiments to you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're running out of time. We'll catch you next time.